Today, we're going to go on a mountain to talk about an exceptional book. In fact, I think that there are very few books that are as honest and thought-provoking as Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It is truly one of the most personally impactful books I've ever read. And if you're wondering why I haven't uploaded anything in a while, it's because it took me a really long time to figure out how to convey this book to you. Viktor Frankl was famously in love with the Alps, and his very favorite mountain was the Rapsalpe, just about an hour south of Vienna. So that's where I am, walking up the mountain Frankl walked up so many times, and honestly, I feel like it hasn't changed all that much. Now, I can't really summarize this book chapter by chapter, because the one thing Frankl wasn't great at was structuring his book in chapters. He really only split it up into two major parts. Part 1 is Frankl telling us about his experiences in the concentration camps. This isn't the theoretical text we're used to on this channel, and summarizing all of it doesn't really make sense. But Frankl's experiences greatly informed his psychological and neurological theories, so I do think it's important to talk about them. And knowing about what Frankl went through in the camps really helped me understand his approach to psychotherapy. That's why I picked out a few stories that I find particularly compelling and relevant. I'm gonna tell you these stories in the next 3 videos, mostly by reading them to you. Part 2 of the book is called Logotherapy in a Nutshell. It is a case for and description of logotherapy, Frankl's school of psychotherapy. Just in case you're only here because you want to know about logotherapy, you can skip to video 4 where we start with part 2. But I do recommend listening to the stories first. First of all, this book does not claim to be an account of facts and events, but of personal experiences. It is the inside story of a concentration camp told by one of its survivors. It is not so much concerned with the sufferings of the mighty, but with the sacrifices, the crucifixion, and the deaths of the great army of unknown and unrecorded victims. Looking at countless records of prisoners who experienced these camps, 3 phases of the inmate's mental reaction to camp life become apparent. The period following the admission, the period where he or she is well entrenched in camp routine, which we'll talk about in the second video, and the period following the release and liberation, which we'll talk about in the third video. The symptom that characterizes the first phase is shock. In the case of Frankl, this really set in when he was on the train to the camp. They had all thought the train would bring them to some munitions factory so they could be employed as forced labor. And then they saw the sign, Auschwitz. With the dawn, the outlines of the immense camp became visible. Then the new arrivals were told to leave their luggage on the train and entered the camp. The prisoners were separated into 2 lines by an SS officer who pointed either to the right or to the left. They didn't yet know the sinister meaning behind the movement of that man's finger, pointing to the right or to the left, but far more frequently to the left. Then it was Frankl's turn. The SS man looked me over, appeared to hesitate, then put both his hands on my shoulders. I tried very hard to look smart, and the officer turned my shoulders very slowly until I faced right, and I moved over to that side. The significance of the finger game was explained to us in the evening. It was the first selection, the first verdict made on our existence or non-existence. For the great majority of our transport, about 90%, it meant death. Their sentence was carried out within the next few hours. Those who were sent to the left marched from the station straight to the crematorium. I inquired from prisoners who had been there for some time where my colleague and friend had been sent. Was he sent to the left side? Yes, I replied. Then you can see him there, I was told. Where? A hand pointed to the chimney a few hundred yards off, which was sending a column of flame up into the grey sky of Poland. It dissolved into a sinister cloud of smoke. So right there, Frankl was among the 10% that survived the initial arrival at the camp. But this wouldn't be the only time he barely survived by the skin of his teeth. Another time in a forest with a temperature of 2 degrees Fahrenheit, we were digging up topsoil, which was frozen hard in order to lay water pipes. By then, I had grown rather weak physically. Along came a foreman with chubby, rosy cheeks. His face definitely reminded me of a pig's head. I noticed that he wore lovely warm gloves in that bitter cold. For a time, he watched me silently. I felt that trouble was brewing, for in front of me lay a mound of earth which showed exactly how much I had dug. Then he began. "You pig! I've been watching you this whole time. I'll teach you to work yet. Wait till you dig dirt with your teeth. You'll die like an animal. In 2 days I'll finish you off. You've never done a stroke of work in your life. What were you, swine? A businessman?" I was past caring, but I had to take his threat of killing me seriously, so I straightened up and looked him directly in the eye. I was a doctor, a specialist. "What, a doctor? I bet you get a lot of money out of people." As it happens, I did most of my work for no money at all, in clinics for the poor. Now I had said too much. He threw himself on me and knocked me down, shouting like a madman. I can no longer remember what he shouted. I want to show with this apparently trivial story that there are moments when indignation can rouse even the seemingly hardened prisoner. Indignation not about cruelty or pain, but about the insult connected with it. That time, blood rushed into my head because I had to listen to a man judge my life who had so little idea of it. A man, I must confess the following remark which I made to my fellow prisoners after the scene afforded me childish relief, who looked so vulgar and brutal that the nurse in the outpatient ward of my hospital would not even have admitted him into the waiting room. Going through these near-death experiences, there were a few things that kept Frankl going. One of those was the memory of his wife. In his suffering, he found willpower in the love he had for her. Writing, love goes very far, beyond the physical person of the beloved. It finds its deepest meaning in our spiritual being, our inner self. Whether or not we are actually present, or whether or not we are still alive at all, ceases somehow to be of importance. Frankl didn't know whether his wife was still alive, and he had no means of finding out. But at this moment, it didn't matter. Had I known that my wife was dead, I think that I still would have given myself undisturbed by the knowledge to the contemplation of her image, and that my mental conversation with her would have been just as vivid and just as satisfying. This, among other things, kept him going and clinging on to his life, even in the most hopeless of times.
You see, when I met Viktor, I learned that he likes mountain climbing, which a sport I have never done. My favorite sport was swimming, but swimming was not Viktor's favorite sport. And I thought, if I accompany Viktor, he never will come higher than the 4th degree, so I can stop him. And so I went on all tours with him. I was not very happy when the tour started, but when I've been on the top, I was rather proud.
Frankl once said that the memory of mountain climbing and of how the rocks feel on the mountain was one of the things that got him through the atrocities of the concentration camps. And while I'll never really be able to understand the horrors Frankl went through in these camps, I can certainly agree that being in this beautiful nature out here on this mountain makes you want to stay on the earth as long as possible.